What happens when one of television's most explosive chefs walks onto a morning show and turns a friendly chat into an absolute disaster? In just 38 seconds, a simple question about cooking techniques sparked an outburst so shocking that it ended with security being called and a guest being escorted out of the building. This is the untold story of how Gordon Ramsay went from welcomed guest to banned from the studio in the span of one interview. Lorraine Kelly sat in her signature bright chair, her warm smile greeting viewers as the cameras rolled that morning. The studio buzzed with its usual energy. Crew members moved quietly in the background. The lighting was perfect. Everything seemed ready for what should have been a straightforward conversation about food, restaurants, and maybe a few cooking tips for viewers at home. Gordon Ramsay walked onto the set with his usual swagger. He settled into the guest chair across from Lorraine. And the interview began with the kind of pleasantries you'd expect. Lorraine welcomed him enthusiastically, thanking him for taking the time to join her show. "It's wonderful to have you here, Gordon," Lorraine said, her Scottish accent carrying that familiar warmth that had made her a beloved figure on morning television. "I know you've got a lot going on with your restaurants and your shows. We're really grateful you could pop by." Gordon nodded, leaning back in his chair with a casual confidence. "Yeah, well, I always make time for the fans, he said. Lorraine smiled and glanced down at her notes. "So, I wanted to start by asking you about home cooking. A lot of our viewers, they're not professional chefs. They're just people trying to make a decent meal for their families after a long day at work. What would you say to someone who feels intimidated by cooking?" It seemed like an innocent enough question. The kind of softball inquiry that gets lobbed at celebrity chefs all the time. But something in Gordon's expression shifted. His jaw tightened just slightly. "Intimidated?" he repeated, his tone carrying an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "Listen, cooking isn't rocket science. If people can't follow a simple recipe, that's their problem, not mine." Lorraine's smile faltered for just a second, but she recovered quickly. Professional that she was. She tried to steer the conversation back to friendlier waters. "Well, of course, but everyone has to start somewhere, don't they? I'm sure even you had to learn the basics at some point." Gordon's eyes narrowed. "I learned by working my tail off in kitchens where mistakes weren't tolerated. I didn't sit around making excuses about being intimidated. You either have it or you don't." The atmosphere in the studio began to change. You could feel it. Lorraine shifted in her seat, maintaining her composure, but clearly sensing that this wasn't going the way she'd planned. She glanced briefly at her producer off camera, then back to Gordon. "Right. Well, I think what people appreciate is when someone can break things down in a way that's accessible," Lorraine said, her voice still pleasant, but with a hint of firmness creeping in. "That's what makes a good teacher, isn't it? Being able to meet people where they are?" Gordon scoffed. Actually scoffed on camera. "A good teacher? Lorraine, I'm not a teacher. I'm a chef. A real chef. I run Michelin-starred restaurants. I don't have time to hold everyone's hand because they can't figure out how to boil an egg." Lorraine's expression shifted. The warmth in her eyes cooled noticeably. "I understand you have high standards, Gordon, and that's admirable. But there's a difference between having standards and being dismissive of people who are genuinely trying to learn." "Dismissive?" Gordon leaned forward, his voice rising slightly. "I'm being realistic. The problem with shows like this is they make everything seem easy and accessible, when the truth is most people are lazy. They want shortcuts. They want instant results. That's not how excellence works." The audience, which had been quiet up until this point, stirred uncomfortably. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lorraine's professional mask was beginning to crack, replaced by genuine frustration. "Gordon, I have to stop you there," she said, her voice firmer now. "Most people aren't lazy. Most people are working hard, juggling jobs and families and responsibilities. They're doing their best. And frankly, That's quite a rude thing to say about the very people who watch your shows and eat at your restaurants. Gordon's face flushed red. Rude? You want to talk about rude? How about inviting me on your little morning show and then lecturing me about how I should talk? I came here as a favor. I'm Lorraine. A favor. A favor? Lorraine's eyebrows shot up. Gordon, you're here to promote your new restaurant. Let's not pretend this is some act of charity. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Gordon's hands gripped the arms of his chair. His voice took on a sharper, more aggressive tone. You know what your problem is, Lorraine. You sit here in your cozy little studio with your tea and biscuits, acting like you understand what it takes to be the best at something. You've never worked a real day in a kitchen. You've never had to fight for a Michelin star. You make a living out of chatting to people. That's it. Just chatting. The studio went dead silent. Crew members froze. The audience gasped audibly. Lorraine's face went from frustrated to genuinely angry. Excuse me? Her voice was ice cold now. Just chatting? I've been in broadcasting for decades, Gordon. I've built a career out of connecting with people, out of making them feel valued and heard. Something you clearly know nothing about. Gordon stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Oh, here we go. The moral high ground. You know what? I don't need this. I don't need to sit here and be talked down to by someone who wouldn't last 5 minutes in a real professional environment. Lorraine stood as well, her posture straight, her voice steady, despite the clear anger in her eyes. A real professional environment? Gordon, professionals don't come on to someone else's show and insult their audience. Professionals don't throw tantrums when they're asked perfectly reasonable questions. And professionals certainly don't behave the way you're behaving right now. Tantrums? Gordon's voice was loud now, echoing through the studio. You think this is a tantrum? This is me telling you the truth. The truth that you're just another mediocre television personality who got lucky. You're not special, Lorraine. And you're replaceable. The entire crew was staring now. Jaws dropped, eyes wide. This had gone so far beyond a normal disagreement. This was a full-blown meltdown happening live. Lorraine's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Get out. Gordon blinked. What? I said get out. Lorraine pointed toward the exit. You're done here. This interview is over. I will not stand here and be disrespected in my own studio, and I certainly won't let you disrespect our viewers. Leave. Now. Gordon laughed, but it was a harsh, ugly sound. You're kicking me off? You're actually kicking me off your show? Yes, Lorraine said, her voice unwavering. I am. You've crossed every line. You've been rude. You've been insulting, and you've shown absolutely no respect for anyone in this room. So yes, Gordon, I'm asking you to leave. Gordon looked around the studio as if expecting someone to intervene, to take his side. But everyone just stared back at him. The audience, the crew. The cameras still rolling, capturing every second of this disaster. This is ridiculous, he muttered, but his voice had lost some of its fire. Absolutely ridiculous. What's ridiculous is your behavior, Lorraine shot back. I've interviewed hundreds of people, Gordon. Actors, musicians, politicians, authors, other chefs, and not one of them has ever acted the way you're acting right now. Not one. Gordon's face was scarlet now, whether from anger or embarrassment. It was hard to tell. Fine, fine. I don't need this circus anyway. Your show is a joke, Lorraine. A complete joke. Then you won't mind leaving, Lorraine said coolly. Gordon turned and started walking toward the exit, but he couldn't resist one final parting shot. He stopped, turned back, and pointed at Lorraine. You know what? You're bitter. That's what this is. You're a bitter woman who can't stand the fact that I've actually accomplished something real in my life. The audience erupted, not in support of Gordon, but in outrage. People started booing. Actually, booing him. Lorraine stood her ground, her arms crossed, her expression one of complete disgust. Security, she called out, her voice calm but commanding. "Please escort Mr. Ramsey out of the building." Two security guards appeared from the wings. They approached Gordon carefully, professionally. One of them spoke quietly to him, gesturing toward the exit. For a moment, then it looked like Gordon might actually refuse to leave, might dig in his heels, and make an even bigger scene. But something in the security guard's expression, or maybe the realization of how badly this had all gone, seemed to deflate him. His shoulders slumped slightly. He shook his head, muttered something under his breath that the microphones didn't quite catch, and allowed himself to be guided toward the door. As he walked off set, the audience's boos followed him. Some people were shaking their heads in disbelief. Others were whispering to each other, clearly shocked by what they'd just witnessed. Lorraine watched him go, her expression unreadable. Once he was out of sight, she turned back to the camera, took a deep breath, and addressed the viewers directly. "Well," she said, and despite everything, there was a slight tremor in her voice. "That certainly wasn't what we had planned for this morning. I want to apologize to all of you watching at home. You tune into this show for positivity, for warmth, for a bit of a laugh, and some interesting conversation. You don't deserve to witness that kind of behavior." She paused, collecting herself. The studio was still silent, everyone hanging on her words. "I've always believed in treating people with kindness and respect," Lorraine continued. "It's the foundation of everything I do here, and I will never, ever compromise on that. Not for ratings, not for a big-name guest, not for anything. Because at the end of the day, what matters most is how we treat each other." The audience erupted into applause. Genuine, heartfelt applause. It started with a few people and quickly spread until the entire studio was clapping, many standing, showing their support for Lorraine. She smiled, a real smile this time, and nodded in acknowledgement. "Thank you. Thank you all. Now, let's take a quick break, shall we? And when we come back, we'll have something much more pleasant to talk about. I promise." As they cut to commercial, Lorraine sat back down in her chair. Her hands were shaking slightly, the adrenaline of the confrontation still coursing through her. A production assistant rushed over with a glass of water, which she accepted gratefully. Backstage, chaos reigned. Producers were on phones, making calls, doing damage control. The legal team was already being consulted about what had just happened and what it meant for the show. Social media was exploding. People who had been watching live already posting clips, sharing their outrage, their support for Lorraine. But back in the studio, as the commercial break ticked by, Lorraine composed herself. She fixed her hair, checked her makeup, took a few deep breaths. When the cameras came back on, she was the picture of professionalism once again. "Welcome back," she said warmly, as if the previous segment had been completely normal. Now, as I mentioned before that rather unexpected interruption, we have a wonderful guest joining us next. Someone who actually knows how to have a civil conversation. The audience laughed, the tension finally breaking. And just like that, Lorraine Kelly proved exactly why she'd been a staple of British morning television for so many years. She didn't let the drama derail her. She didn't dwell on it or milk it for attention. She simply moved on, with grace and professionalism, showing Gordon Ramsay exactly what a real professional looks like. We're in the green room. Gordon had been escorted to collect his belongings. The security guards stood by, not threatening, but present, making it clear that he wasn't welcome to stay. A production assistant, barely out of college by the look of her, nervously approached him with his coat. "Mr. Ramsey, your car is waiting outside," she said quietly, avoiding eye contact. Gordon snatched the coat from her hands without a word. His face was still red, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. He could hear the muffled sounds of the show continuing without him, the audience laughing at something Lorraine had said. As he left the building, stepping out into the morning light, a few photographers who had been tipped off were already waiting. Cameras clicked and flashed. Questions were shouted at him. "Gordon, what happened in there? Did you really get kicked off the show? What did you say to Lorraine?" he pushed past them without answering, said climbing into the waiting car and slamming the door. As the car pulled away from the studio, he stared out the window, his reflection glaring back at him in the glass. Back inside, the show continued. Lorraine interviewed a children's author who had a new book out. They talked about creativity, about inspiring young readers, about the joy of storytelling. It was pleasant. It was warm. It was everything the interview with Gordon should have been. During another commercial break, Lorraine's producer came over to check on her. "Are you okay?" the producer asked, concern evident in her voice. Lorraine nodded. "I'm fine. Honestly, I'm fine. I just can't believe he thought he could come in here and act like that." "You handled it perfectly," the producer said. "Absolutely perfectly. The phones are ringing off the hook. People are furious with him, and they're all supporting you." Lorraine smiled tiredly. "It shouldn't have had to come to that, though." "It really shouldn't have." "No," the producer agreed. "But it did, and you stood your ground. That's what people will remember." As the show wrapped up for the day, Lorraine delivered her usual cheerful sign-off, thanking viewers for watching, reminding them to be kind to one another, wishing them a lovely rest of their day. The cameras stopped rolling. The lights dimmed. The audience filed out, still buzzing about what they'd witnessed. Lorraine sat in her chair for a moment longer, letting the quiet wash over her. It had been one of the strangest mornings of her career, one of the most challenging, but she'd handled it the only way she knew how, with dignity, with strength, and with an unwavering commitment to the values she held dear. She stood up, stretched, and headed back to her dressing room. Tomorrow would be a new day, a new show, new guests, and hopefully much better behavior. But today, this morning, this interview would become legendary. Not because of Gordon Ramsay's outburst, but because of how Lorraine Kelly had responded to it. With class, with composure, with the kind of quiet strength that reminded everyone watching exactly why she'd earned her place as one of Britain's most beloved television presenters. The confrontation that morning revealed something important. It showed that no matter how famous someone is, no matter how many restaurants they run, or how many shows they have, so that doesn't give them the right to treat others poorly. It showed that respect isn't optional, that kindness matters, that there are still people in the industry who will stand up and say, enough is enough. Lorraine Kelly had always been known as the warm, friendly face of morning television, the person you could trust to start your day with a smile. But on that morning, she showed she was more than that. She was strong. She was principled. She was someone who wouldn't be pushed around or disrespected, not in her own studio, not on her own show. And Gordon Ramsay, despite all his success and fame and culinary expertise, learned a hard lesson. That talent doesn't excuse arrogance. That achievement doesn't grant immunity from basic human decency. That sometimes when you push too hard, when you cross too many lines, you get exactly what you deserve, which, in this case, was being shown the door. The whole thing, from that first dismissive comment about home cooks to the final moment when security escorted him out, had taken less than 15 minutes. 15 minutes that would be replayed, analyzed, discussed, and debated for much longer. But in that moment, in that studio, on that morning, it was simple. A guest had been disrespectful. A host had stood her ground. And justice, in its own small way, had been served. Lorraine never raised her voice to a shout. She never stooped to Gordon's level. She simply held firm to her principles, stood up for herself and her audience, and did what needed to be done. That's what real strength looks like. Not loud and aggressive, not demanding and dismissive, but calm, clear, and unshakable. The interview that was supposed to be about food and cooking and restaurants became about something much more fundamental. About respect, about boundaries, about knowing when enough is enough and having the courage to act on it. And that's a lesson worth far more than any cooking tip.